What's happening, YouTube? Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the channel. Got a quick and easy one for you today, guys. We're going to be talking about how to maximize the use of your tools. So for example, everyone knows the double wrench trick, to lock two wrenches together to provide leverage to create one long wrench. So there's a lot of tips and tricks in the automotive repair field when it comes to using our tools to repair vehicles. So in this video, guys, I'm going to share with you guys just a few tips and tricks that I picked up over the years, and hopefully it might help you out. So let's take a look. Okay, so we will go ahead and just demonstrate the double wrench trick. I know everyone knows this, but you never know. There could be somebody out there that may not know what I'm talking about. So we will go ahead and demonstrate the double wrench trick. So the double wrench trick is pretty self-explanatory. What you're trying to do is basically create a long wrench like we have here. Obviously, the best option is to buy a long wrench like this to give yourself leverage. The longer the wrench, the easier it is for you to bust that fastener loose. It's called leverage. So you'll just take two wrenches and connect them together to make that leverage. So basically all you do is take the wrench and lock it in like this, and there you go. You have two wrenches, but you need to be careful when doing this. This could be kind of risky. That's why I always recommend just going ahead and buying a longer wrench set. But if you got to do what you got to do, and if you have to do it, this is a great way to create more leverage, but you got to be careful a lot of times because this could get kind of risky. So anyway, that's the double wrench trick. So let's move on to the next tip. Okay, so the next tip is going to be to use a pick hammer like this if you don't have one. These are commonly used in auto body, and if you don't have one of these and you're an auto technician, you should consider having these. These come in handy quite a bit. Especially when removing CV axles, particularly where that CV axle splines into the hub. We all know it can be difficult sometimes trying to get that CV axle to pull and separate out of the hub before we can go back and pry it out of the transmission. And if that's the case, that's where these little pick hammers come in handy. This piece right here will set up against the CV axle really nice. So you set that right into the CV axle, right on the tip, and then you got this nice surface over here to give it a nice good whack, couple good whacks, and it'll push it through. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on a pickaxe, a pick hammer. I certainly didn't spend a whole lot of money on one of these, but I keep them around for that purpose because sometimes it can be difficult, and you certainly don't want to go hammering on the CV axle itself because you could ruin the threads. Some people will screw on the CV axle first and then hammer it to sort of protect the threads. That method works, but it can be risky. This is a guaranteed way to get that CV axle out a lot quicker without risk. So I highly recommend using one of these pick hammers for that purpose. Also, there's a nice flat surface here, which could be really good for hammering seals in as well. All right, so let's move on to tip 3. All right, guys, tip number 3, how to maximize tools that you already have. So if you are a technician, more than likely you have a set of oil filter sockets because as an auto technician, we change a lot of oil. And not necessarily just for a service. You may have to drain the oil to replace an oil pan gasket. You may have to drain the oil to replace the oil pan itself. Maybe you might be doing an engine replacement. You know, you might be changing the oil pump. In most cases, you'll have to drain the oil if you do a top-end job. So there's draining the oil and changing the filter is something that we do quite a bit in auto repair. So it's never going to hurt to own a master set like this full of these oil filter sockets. And you want to get a good set because they do sell plastic ones, but you want to avoid buying plastic ones and go ahead and buy a good metal set like I have here. Now, what I do is basically, I know no matter what size rear main seal that I'm installing into a vehicle, one of these in here are going to fit up against that rear main seal so that I could tap it in. I use these all the time. So this is another way to sort of maximize the use of tools that you probably already have to get a job done. So again, if you got a rear main seal you need to get in, and you have these oil filter sockets, go take a look at that socket and or go take a look at that seal and grab a socket and line them up and see if you could potentially use one of these to drive in that rear main seal. So anyway, that's tip number 3. Let's move on to the next. Okay guys, so the next tip I got for you on how to maximize tools that you already have is going to be this gasket scraper. So I'm pretty sure most people out there will have a gasket scraper if they're engaging in the repair of automobiles. And yes, they work great to scrape off old paper gasket material. But you can also use these as a nice wedge. Now a lot of times it could be dangerous if you use a screwdriver to try to wedge it in there. Depending on what the material of the part is, you could bend it or warp it. So I found it to be a lot more effective to use a gasket scraper for that, because it's far thinner than a screwdriver, and you could get it in there. So it's a lot easier to get that gasket scraper to wedge up underneath whatever it is you're trying to break the seal on. So most people will have a gasket scraper, so I think this is a great way again to maximize a tool that you already have. All right, moving on to the next. All right guys, so the next tip we got is going to be on this pair of locking pliers, aka vice grips. Most people will have a set of vice grips. So I like to use these, and I think a good way to maximize the use of these vice grips are when dealing with spring clamps. I don't know about you, but I hate spring clamps, and I would always throw the spring clamp away whenever I remove it and just put on a screw style hose clamp to not have to deal with the spring clamp. But that may not always be the case if you don't have another clamp handy and you have to work with that spring clamp. We all know you clamp on it and you got to work it down that hose until you can slide that spring clamp down away from the sealing surface of the hose and the spout so you can get it off. Well, a lot of times spring clamps can be pretty wide, and those ones are difficult to hold it in place and try to work it at the same time while keeping tension on it. And a lot of times you'll slip and you'll lose it, and try it again, you'll slip and you'll lose it. So I found a pair of vice grips will keep those spring clamps locked for you, and once you get it locked with the vice grips, it'll stay locked and you can slide them down. Now, if you run into an issue where it's a really big spring clamp, the problem you have is that once you lock it, well, the vice grips are still open because the clamp is so large. So here's a tip for you. So almost every pair of vice grips will have a hex fitting on the back of the vice grips. So what you want to do to make it easy on you so you don't have to struggle, you could go ahead and clamp it loose just so that you got a bite on it, and then you grab your Allen socket and you can go ahead and run those pliers or run these vice grips down. Now you got a super tight grip on that spring clamp, and it's not letting go, and it didn't take you a whole lot of effort. You didn't exert a whole lot of your energy on one spring clamp, and you slide it down, and there you go. So that's another tip on how to maximize the use of tools that you already have. All right, guys, the next tip I got for you is a large socket tip. Now, we all use large sockets to drive things in, perhaps some freeze plugs or something like that, or oil seals, or maybe a bearing, and we'll use a big socket to drive it in. And that's a great tip. That always works. I do that as well. But you could also use these to press in a tool, or to press in a part rather. I use these quite a bit when doing Toyota Camry cam seals, because a lot of times you may not have room with the hammer, because when you're doing a timing belt, a lot of times the cam is so close to the body that there's no way you could get a good swing on it. And so when you get in a situation like that, particularly like Toyota Camrys and Honda in some cases too, there's just no way to hammer that seal in because it's too close to the strut tower. You'll hit the body, you know, every time. So what you do in that situation is you still grab your big socket, but you get a bolt. And you find a bolt that fits into the cam sprocket, and you get you a washer that fits around here. You get your seal put in there, and you get this up against it, and you stick your bolt through, and you start to thread it into the cam, and you go ahead and you start to tighten it up and press that seal in. It goes in perfect every time. So I thought that was another tip to use big sockets. Not only can you use them to hammer on, but you also could use them to press if you find a right size bolt to screw into whatever it is you're doing, and use the socket to press the seal in by tightening the fastener. All right, moving on to the next tip. Okay guys, so another tip I got for you is when dealing with extensions. A lot of times, if you keep an extension for a long time, I'm sure you've all been in a situation where you stick a socket on that extension, and if you go like this, it'll fall off. That's happened to me so many times. Just this ball right here will eventually get worn down from sliding the socket on and pulling it off so many times that it gets worn down. And as soon as you put a socket on there and you turn it upside down and put any type of little movement on it, it'll just fall right off. And when that happens, it's really not even worth using the extension for that purpose anymore, because you're going to end up dropping that socket somewhere you shouldn't drop it. You're going to forget. You're going to be in the middle of a 4 or 5 hour job. You're gonna put a socket on this extension. You're gonna completely forget that socket falls off. You're gonna drop it down somewhere you don't need to drop it down. Then you're gonna spend another hour trying to fish that socket out where it shouldn't be. When that happens, I know you don't want to throw it away because it's a good extension, and you're right. Don't throw it away. It's now a driver tool. As you can see, that's pretty beat up from me using this as a driver tool. Because when I got into that situation, I didn't want to throw this away, and now it's a driver tool. And I keep this tool in my toolbox, and I use it as a short driver tool. Also, if I ever need to hammer a socket onto a rounded fastener, so you could get your turbo socket out, and you can use this to pound on your turbo socket over a round fastener, and just use this primarily for that purpose, as a driving tool, or you know, like I just mentioned, sticking it on your turbo socket and hammering it over a round fastener. And you could just keep this for that specific purpose instead of throwing this tool away. So that's what I do with extensions that end up going bad on me. I use them for that purpose. I got a 1/4 for that purpose. I got a 3/8 for that purpose. I don't have a 1/2 inch for that purpose, but I'm not opposed to it. This used to be a screwdriver that had a handle on it. As you can see, there's no longer a handle on this because I broke it off. I believe I was hammering on it, misusing it, and broke the handle off of it. But you can't let a broken tool go to waste. You could maximize the use of your tool. I now use this to get seals out. So I could take this tool and gently tap it in and start getting that seal to come out. And so a lot of times when I'm in tight confinement areas and I can't get a big seal puller in there, I pull this out, and like I said, I could just gently tap it in and start to pry that seal out until I could pop it out. And I've had this thing for a long time, and I think that if I start wrenching full time again, I would have no problem using this. And if something happened to this, I'd probably go and buy another cheap screwdriver and bust the handle off and use it as a tool. Now, I know that there's so many different modifications to a tool. That's not what this is about. I didn't specifically set out to modify these tools for another purpose. So that's a total separate video. This is maximizing tools that you already have. So in other words, don't throw this tool out, just repurpose it. All right, so our last tip. All right, so for our last tip, we all have power tools like this. And the good thing about having power tools is that they come with batteries. And so you have a power source at your ready. Now, I've made this point in other videos, but I'm gonna make it again because it's a very useful tip and a way to maximize the use of a tool that you already have. So whenever I go to, let's say, a junkyard, I'll always take a battery with me. Well, I'll take the whole tool because I'll probably use the tool to remove, you know, whatever it is I need to remove. But you can also jump that component because you got power here to see if that component works, you know, such as an electrical fan, any type of 12-volt electrical component. Maybe you're going to get a power window regulator, maybe you need a new seat motor, whatever it is, and you might be at the junkyard. You want to know if that thing works before you start pulling it and bringing it home. So the best thing to do is to take a power tool with you and just find the polarity in advance, like I usually do, and I'll mark it on the tool, where's the hot and ground before you get there. You can find that by using a voltmeter to check the polarity. So you get there and you can jump those components and make sure they work. I'll give you a quick example. I don't have like a fuel pump or anything like that here that I could power up, but I do have a cheap scan tool I'll power up for you off of this battery. Okay guys, so like I stated, I don't have like a fuel pump that I can show you. I mean, obviously you guys know it'll spin the fuel pump, or the fan motor, but just for demonstration purposes, I do have this cheap scan tool. So I'll power the scan tool up. See if I can zoom in a little bit. So notice the scan tool. We'll just power it up just to show you what I mean. But you will do this to check and see if, you know, the seat motor is working or whatever. So we'll just power up the scan tool. So you could power up any 12-volt system while you're out at the junkyard, and you know, that way you don't have to gamble whether or not that tool is working or not. You know, you can confirm it and verify it by taking a battery, and like this video is titled, maximizing the tools that you already have. So anyway guys, those were my tips. I hope somebody could get some benefit from it. Alright guys, well that's all I got for this video. I have tons of tips and tricks, so I may do another video like this. Just working in this field for as long as I have, you can't help but to pick up tips and tricks. If you guys got any tips and tricks you want to share, please feel free to leave them in the comments or make a video. If you've never made a video before, you try your hand at YouTube. Show some of the tips and tricks that you've learned over the years to help out the rest of the community. Anyway guys, this is Bryan916. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys on the next one.